There's a moment in every person's life when everything that seems certain suddenly becomes uncertain. For me, that moment came in the most bizarre way. Not in the way you expect, not with a phone call or a huge fight, but in the silence. I had always thought of myself as a man of routine. My life, for the most part, was predictable. Work, home, dinner, sleep. The occasional weekend trip. Nothing extravagant. But when the moment came for me to face the truth, it wasn't a bombshell dropped in the middle of an argument or a confrontation. It was something so simple, so subtle, that I almost didn't notice it. And in that subtlety, everything fell apart. Let me start by saying, I never meant to find out. I never meant to uncover the cracks that had been forming in my life for months. I was content to live in the blissful ignorance that everything was fine, that the small changes in behavior, the late nights, and the odd distractions were just a part of life. But when you've been in a relationship for as long as I had, you start to notice patterns. And even the smallest shift in those patterns can start to unravel everything you thought you knew. The first sign that something was off didn't come from a suspicious text message, a strange phone call, or a guilty look. It came from a decision as small as buying a bottle of whiskey. Now, I know what you're thinking. Whiskey? Really? That's where it all started? But hear me out. It wasn't about the whiskey itself. It was about what it symbolized. You see, Clara, that was my fiancée's name, had never been much of a drinker. She would have a glass of wine with dinner, maybe a cocktail when we went out, but she didn't drink like I did. I had my own taste for whiskey, a quiet, almost ceremonial thing I did on weekends. One night, after a long day at work, I decided to grab a bottle of my favorite brand. It was nothing special, just a simple ritual I'd enjoyed for years. When I got home, I opened the bottle and poured myself a glass, the familiar amber liquid gliding into the glass. I settled down on the couch and took a sip. It was the same feeling, the same ritual I'd gone through 100 times. But this time, something was different. Clara walked into the living room, and I offered her a glass, as I always did. She looked at me, paused for a moment, and then shook her head. "I'm fine," she said, her voice tight. I didn't think much of it. She hadn't been much of a drinker lately, but I didn't want to push it. What struck me, though, was the way she acted after that. She didn't sit down next to me like she usually would. Instead, she grabbed her phone and started texting, her face illuminated by the screen. Now, in a relationship, you learn to read these things. You learn to understand when your partner is distracted or when something's wrong, even if they don't say anything. But I didn't say anything either. I didn't want to make a fuss over something that seemed so minor. The next few weeks were a blur of minor incidents like this. Clara would be distant, often texting late into the night. When I asked her about it, she would always brush it off, telling me she was just catching up with work or friends. But I could see the change. I could feel it in the way she didn't laugh at my jokes anymore, or in the way she would pull away from me when I tried to hold her hand. But I kept quiet. I kept telling myself that it was nothing, that maybe it was just stress, that maybe she was just going through a phase. Then came that night. It was a Saturday. Clara had told me she was going out with some old friends. Nothing unusual, right? She had done that 100 times before. I told her to go have fun, enjoy herself. I stayed home, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. It was just a night like any other. Except it wasn't. I didn't hear from Clara for hours, which, again, wasn't that strange. But when I did get a message, it was odd. She had texted me around 11 p.m., saying, "I'm with some friends, don't wait up for me tonight." Nothing particularly alarming, but something about it felt off. A few hours later, I checked my phone again. Another text. This time, it was from an unknown number. "Hey John, this is Max. I'm with Clara. She's fine, don't worry." Max. I didn't know anyone named Max. And why was someone else texting me about Clara? I looked at the message for a moment, trying to make sense of it. I thought about calling Clara, but something made me hesitate. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. I had this overwhelming urge to go to the bar, to just see for myself what was going on. I wasn't a jealous guy. I never had been. But in that moment, something inside me clicked. Something told me I had to know, had to see for myself. I grabbed my jacket and drove to the bar, the unfamiliar sense of unease settling in my stomach. When I walked into the dimly lit room, I immediately saw Clara. She was sitting at a corner booth, laughing with a man I didn't recognize. Max, I assumed. But there was something about the way they were sitting close together, their body language, the way he was touching her arm. It didn't sit right with me. I stayed in the doorway, watching them from a distance. Clara leaned in, her face bright with laughter, her eyes sparkling with something I hadn't seen in a long time. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just a friend night. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't about the whiskey. It wasn't about the texts. It was the way they looked at each other, the way they were comfortable with each other in a way she and I hadn't been in months. I stood there, frozen, watching as Clara rested her hand on Max's chest. I felt my heart sinking into my stomach, the silence in my head growing louder with each passing second. And in that silence, everything became clear. As I stood there, my breath coming in shallow bursts, I could hardly believe what I was seeing. Clara, the woman I had thought I knew inside and out, was practically wrapped around this stranger, laughing like she had forgotten the world outside of that dimly lit bar. And Max, his hands on her shoulders, leaning in too close for comfort, looked at her the way I had once looked at her. It was like a gut punch, and for the first time in years, I felt utterly helpless. I told myself to leave, to walk away and pretend this was some mistake or misunderstanding. I could rationalize it, could convince myself I was overreacting. But as I stood in that doorway, watching Clara's carefree smile and the way she seemed completely unaware of my presence, the rational side of me died. I didn't move for what felt like hours, paralyzed by a combination of anger, confusion, and disbelief. It was as if time had stopped for me. Everything in that bar felt distorted, like it was happening in slow motion, but I could hear every laugh, every joke, every click of the glasses. I wanted to call out to her, to confront her right then and there, but I knew that wouldn't do anything but cause chaos. What was I supposed to say? Hey, Clara, is this how you wanted to spend your night? Flirting with another guy while I'm sitting at home wondering where you are? That wasn't something I was prepared to hear. That wasn't how I wanted things to end, if this was really the end. I turned around and walked back outside, my thoughts racing. I didn't know what to do, didn't know what this meant, but the one thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't just sit idly by and let this moment pass without doing something. I had to get answers. I wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, but the gut feeling gnawing at me now was undeniable. I got into my car and sat there for a long moment, staring out at the quiet street. The bar wasn't far, and I could have gone back in. I could have walked up to Clara, confronted her, but I knew that would only give me half the picture. I needed the full story. I needed to understand exactly what was going on, even if it was something I didn't want to hear. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. I barely remember the streets I passed or the red lights I sat at. My mind was still focused on Clara, on Max, on the laughter I had heard. When I pulled into my parking space, I just sat there, my hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding. What was I supposed to do now? What if I was wrong? What if I was misreading the whole thing? But I couldn't shake the image of Clara, sitting there with Max, her arm casually draped around him, her body language open and welcoming. I didn't know how long she had been seeing him, or if this was the first time, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I stepped out of the car and walked upstairs to my apartment. The silence in the hallway was suffocating. I opened the door, and there she was, Clara, sitting on the couch, phone in hand, looking at something on the screen. She looked up as I walked in, her expression neutral, like she hadn't just been out with another man, having the time of her life. For a moment, everything felt surreal. I almost wanted to believe that I had imagined the entire thing, but the image of her laughing with Max was burned into my mind. Hey, John, Clara said, as if nothing had happened. How was your night? I tried to keep my voice steady, but the words came out clipped. Where were you tonight? It wasn't a question, but a demand. Clara frowned, sitting up straighter. I told you, I was out with some friends. Out with some friends, huh? I repeated, my voice colder than I intended. And Max. Her face froze for a split second, and that tiny slip of vulnerability told me everything I needed to know. Clara was always a great actress, but that small crack in her composure was the confirmation I didn't want but desperately needed. What about Max? She asked, a little too quickly. Her eyes darted toward the phone in her hand, and I could tell she was trying to come up with a plausible story. I didn't let her. I saw you, Clara. I saw you at the bar. You were with him, laughing, touching, just like you used to with me. So don't try to lie your way out of this. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. I could see her weighing her options, trying to figure out how to spin this. But no matter how she tried to justify it, the truth was clear. She wasn't just hanging out with a friend. She was with Max, and that wasn't just innocent fun. I didn't mean for you to see, she finally whispered, her voice faltering. It's not what you think. I took a step forward, my heart hammering. Then tell me what I'm supposed to think. Tell me what this is. Because right now, all I see is you betraying me. Clara's face twisted in discomfort, and for the first time in a long while, I saw her truly unsettled. She wasn't as confident as she usually was. There was a flicker of guilt in her eyes, just a flash, but it was there. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice small now, almost apologetic. It just did. I don't know when it started, but it's been happening for a while now. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to scream, to demand to know why she had done this, why she had let things go this far. But no words came out. I was paralyzed by the cold reality of it all. Clara, I said, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. Why didn't you just tell me? Why didn't you tell me what was going on? Her eyes filled with tears now, but she didn't try to hide them. I was scared, John. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you. The words should have felt like an apology, but they only made things worse. She didn't want to hurt me. She had already done that. It wasn't about the words anymore. It was about what had been happening behind my back. I stood there, unable to say anything else. There was nothing left to say. I had already seen everything I needed to see. And then it hit me. The engagement ring, sitting there on the coffee table, a symbol of everything I thought I had. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I thought I would be. I was broken. I was betrayed. And somehow, I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Without a word, I walked over to the table, picked up the ring, and dropped it into her lap. It was time to make a choice. A painful, difficult choice. I'm done, Clara, I said, my voice hollow. Take it. I'm done. And with that, I walked out of the apartment, not knowing what came next, but knowing one thing for certain. I would never be the same again. I don't know how long I stood outside that door after I dropped the engagement ring in her lap. The weight of the moment was too heavy for words, too suffocating to be processed all at once. As I walked down the stairs, the soft click of the door behind me felt like the last sound of something I couldn't quite hold on to anymore. I'd always thought of myself as a patient person, someone who didn't overreact. But this was different. The betrayal hit me hard, and for a moment, I didn't know what to do with myself. My hands were shaking as I stepped outside and into the cold air, the wind biting at my skin, the world around me feeling strangely distant. I had imagined 1,000 scenarios, 1,000 conversations, but none of them had prepared me for the flat, emotionless reality of what had just happened. I had told myself I wouldn't cry, that I wouldn't let it break me, but as I walked to my car, I felt tears stinging at the corners of my eyes. I wiped them away angrily, furious at myself for letting things go so far. I couldn't believe I was standing there, alone, after everything we had been through. Clara and I had planned our future together, talked about the house, the kids, the vacations. All of that was now a fragile illusion. I could feel the sting of it in my chest, but what hurt even more was the fact that I didn't even know how to fix it. I got into the car, slamming the door harder than I meant to. I just needed to drive, to get out of there. I didn't want to be home, didn't want to be alone in that apartment with the echoes of what Clara and I used to be. I drove aimlessly for hours, not caring where I was going. My mind was spinning, the picture of Clara and Max flashing before my eyes again and again. What had happened between them? Was it just physical? Or had it been emotional too? Had I been so blind that I missed all the signs, the tiny cracks in the foundation of what I thought was a solid relationship? I wanted to believe the best of her, to believe that she wasn't completely at fault, but the truth was undeniable now. I ended up at a bar, one I'd gone to a few times over the years. It wasn't my usual place, but I needed something to numb the thoughts running rampant in my head. The bartender didn't ask questions as I ordered a whiskey, the glass smooth and comforting against my hand. It felt like a ritual, something I could hold on to in this chaos. I wasn't there to get drunk or to drown my sorrows, but to quiet the storm inside my head. I sat there for hours, barely aware of the people around me, lost in my own thoughts. But eventually, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, not in the mood for conversation, but I didn't expect to see who it was. John? It was Ryan, the guy who had called me that night. The one who had texted me, telling me Clara was fine. He was standing there, looking a bit awkward, but with a sincere look in his eyes. I didn't expect to see you here, he said, lowering himself onto the stool beside me without waiting for an invitation. He ordered a beer, and for a second, the tension between us was palpable. I didn't know what to say. I was too pissed off, too lost in the mess that had been made to care much about pleasantries. I'm not here for company, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Ryan just shrugged, like he didn't mind. I get it, man. But I didn't come over to make things worse. I came to talk. I owe you that much. I turned to face him fully. I had no idea what he could possibly have to say, but I was tired of pretending everything was fine. Maybe he had answers. Maybe he had something that could explain what the hell had happened. Talk, I asked, leaning back in my chair. What could you possibly have to say to me, Ryan? You've already done enough. Ryan looked at me, his expression softening. I know, but here's the thing you need to understand. Clara didn't want you to find out this way. She never wanted to hurt you. I almost laughed, the bitterness rising up in my throat. You think that matters now? You think this is some misunderstanding? No, Ryan said, shaking his head. But it wasn't what you think. Clara and I, we were both going through something. It wasn't supposed to go as far as it did. But it did, and now it's a mess. She's a good person, John. She didn't want to hurt you. Not like this. His words didn't make me feel better. They just made everything feel worse. So you're saying I should just forgive her? Let it go? No, he replied, his voice steady. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that this wasn't planned. It wasn't some game. It just happened. And now she feels like she's lost you. And that's something she can't live with. I looked at him, not sure whether I was hearing the truth or just someone's attempt to clean up the mess. But something in his eyes made me pause. Then why didn't she tell me? I asked. Why did she let it go this far without saying a word? Ryan hesitated for a moment before answering, his gaze turning distant. I don't know. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she didn't know how to admit that she made a mistake. We both made mistakes. I was silent for a long time, the words swirling in my mind like a fog. The pain of it all was still there, but Ryan's honesty, in a weird way, felt like a small light in the darkness. Maybe Clara didn't want to hurt me, but the damage was already done. I don't know what to do with this information, I said finally. It's not like it fixes anything. No, Ryan agreed. But maybe it helps you understand that this isn't the end. You don't have to forgive her, but you should at least know the truth before you make a decision. The bartender slid another whiskey in front of me, and I stared at it for a moment before lifting it to my lips. The truth. That's what I was left with now. But it didn't feel like closure. It just felt like a new kind of pain, a different kind of uncertainty. What now? What came next in this mess I was in? The only thing I knew for sure was that the past was gone. And the future? Well, I had no idea how I was supposed to face that without the person I thought I knew by my side. The days that followed that conversation with Ryan were a blur, a strange mixture of numbness and turmoil. I couldn't bring myself to talk to Clara, couldn't face her, not after what I had learned. She had left me a couple of voicemails, a few texts apologizing and begging me to talk to her, but I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to look her in the eyes and pretend that everything was fine when, in reality, the world I thought I knew had been turned upside down. But as much as I wanted to avoid her, there was a part of me that needed closure. I needed to hear it from her directly, to understand why it had happened, why everything between us had fallen apart so easily. I didn't want to make any rash decisions. I didn't want to rush into a choice that could haunt me forever, but I also couldn't keep pretending nothing had changed. So I did what I knew I had to do. I called her. Her voice on the other end of the phone was shaky, but she picked up after the first ring, like she had been waiting for me to reach out. John, she said, almost whispering my name. You called. I didn't respond immediately. Part of me was still angry, still heartbroken, and I wasn't sure how to express any of it without losing control. But I pushed that aside and forced myself to speak. I need to see you. There was a pause, then a soft sigh. Okay, where? I told her to meet me at the park where we used to walk when we first started dating, a place that had always been special to us. It felt like the right place to talk, a neutral ground where we could face each other without distractions. When I arrived, Clara was already there, sitting on a bench under the large oak tree, her head down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The sight of her, looking so fragile, so different from the woman I thought I knew, made my heart ache. I took a deep breath and walked toward her, each step feeling heavier than the last. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red from crying. The moment our eyes met, I could see the guilt, the regret, the sorrow in them. It was as if she was waiting for me to say something, anything, to make the first move, but I didn't know what to say. I had too many questions, too many emotions swirling inside me. "John," she said softly, standing up as I reached her. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." I shook my head, cutting her off. "Clara, you don't get it. This isn't just about what happened. This is about everything. The lies, the distance, the way you pulled away from me. I don't even recognize you anymore." Her face crumpled at my words, and I saw the weight of my accusations settle in her expression. But she didn't turn away. She stayed, waiting for me to continue. "I don't know when it started, when you started changing," I said, my voice cracking. "But I felt it. I felt you slipping away, and I didn't do anything about it. I should have seen the signs, but I was too blind, too busy being comfortable to notice." Clara took a shaky breath, stepping closer to me. "John, please listen. I never wanted to hurt you. I loved you. I still do, I don't know what happened. It wasn't supposed to be like this." I stared at her for a long moment, weighing her words, the sincerity in her voice. But there was something that didn't sit right with me. Was this just another attempt to smooth things over, or was it the truth? Could I believe her, knowing what I had seen, knowing what I had heard from Ryan? "You say you loved me," I said slowly. "But if you really loved me, how could you let it get this far? How could you be with someone else, like it didn't even matter?" Clara stepped back, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It wasn't like that, John. It wasn't about him. It was about me, about what I was going through. I was so lost, and I didn't know how to talk to you about it. You were always so steady, and I just felt like I was drowning. I thought I could handle it on my own, but I couldn't. And then Max. He was there, and I made a mistake. I should have told you everything. I should have never let it get this far." I closed my eyes, taking in a shaky breath. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been when I first confronted her. But the pain, the sense of betrayal, was still there, and I didn't know how to let go of it. "You should have told me, Clara. That's all I keep coming back to. You should have told me. I wasn't some stranger. I was your fiancée. I would have listened. But instead, you chose to hide from me." She reached out, her hand trembling as it hovered near mine. I know I messed up, and I'm so sorry. If you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I swear I will do whatever it takes to make it right. I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm not that person anymore." I looked at her hand, then back into her eyes. Her face was full of pain, regret, and something else I couldn't quite place, something desperate. She was begging me, pleading with me, and it made me want to pull her close, to forgive her. But then I thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the deceit, the betrayal, and I felt something inside me harden. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." The silence between us grew heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Clara's face crumbled at my words, and for a moment, I wondered if she truly understood the gravity of what had been lost. She wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with. That person was gone. She had made her choices, and I had to make mine. "I don't think I can keep going with this," I said quietly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I can't keep pretending that nothing happened. I can't unsee what I saw." Clara collapsed back onto the bench, her hands covering her face as sobs racked her body. I stood there, watching her fall apart, and for a moment, I felt nothing but emptiness. This wasn't the ending I had imagined. This wasn't how I had pictured our future. But the truth was, there was no future with her anymore. Not the way things were. "I'm sorry," she choked out, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted to hurt you." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. But believing her didn't change anything. It didn't undo the hurt, the broken trust. It didn't erase the reality that our lives had just taken a different path, and there was no going back. I turned and walked away from her, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I walked away, I knew one thing for certain. This was the end of something. But it was also the beginning of something else. Something I wasn't ready for, but something that was waiting for me nonetheless. And I had no idea what that would be. The days after walking away from Clara felt like I was living in some kind of haze. I went through the motions of my daily life, but nothing felt the same anymore. Work, which used to be something I did to clear my head, became an overwhelming blur. I would sit in meetings, nodding absent-mindedly, but all I could think about was what had happened, what I had seen, what she had done. It gnawed at me like a constant ache. I couldn't escape it, and I found myself questioning everything. Everything I thought I knew about Clara, about our relationship, about myself. How had I missed the signs? Was I so blinded by love that I couldn't see what was right in front of me? It had only been a few days since I left her at that park, but it felt like a lifetime. She had called a few times, but I couldn't bring myself to pick up. I wasn't ready to hear her voice, to hear her apologies, to let her fill the air with empty words. What good would it do? It wouldn't change what had happened. It wouldn't change the fact that the woman I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with had betrayed me. I found myself sitting in the living room one evening, staring at the engagement ring she had left behind on the coffee table. It still felt like a symbol of everything I had lost, my trust, my faith in her, the future I had imagined with her. I reached out to touch it, running my fingers along the cold metal. For a second, I thought about putting it back on my finger, about somehow making things work, about finding a way to forget. But I knew deep down that it was impossible. I stood up suddenly, pacing around the apartment. My mind raced. I kept thinking about Max, about how he had been there, how he had become her escape. What was it about him that made her turn to him instead of me? Was it something I had done wrong? Was I not enough for her anymore? I needed answers, but more than that, I needed to know if there was anything left of the person I had fallen in love with. Was she still in there somewhere? Or had I just been fooling myself this whole time? That night, I decided to confront her again. Not for closure, not for forgiveness, but for the truth. I needed to know the full extent of what had happened between her and Max. I needed to understand why it had all fallen apart so suddenly. I called Clara and told her I wanted to meet. She agreed without hesitation, and we arranged to meet at a small coffee shop in the city. The place was quiet, almost empty, with the sound of soft jazz playing in the background. It felt like an odd place for a confrontation, but somehow it made sense. It was neutral ground, far enough from our past, but close enough for me to still feel the weight of everything. When I arrived, Clara was already sitting at a table by the window. She looked different, more fragile, like the person I once knew was buried beneath layers of guilt and shame. Her eyes were red from crying, and I could tell she hadn't been sleeping. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered everything, and the anger surged again. I sat down across from her, and for the first time since we had met, the silence between us was thick, suffocating. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand to stop her. "I need to hear the truth, Clara," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I don't want any more excuses. No more apologies. I need to understand what happened. What was it between you and Max? Was it just physical, or was there something more?" Clara's face crumpled, and I could see the regret flash across her features. She hesitated, her fingers gripping the edge of her coffee cup as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. "It wasn't just physical," she whispered. "But it wasn't love, John. I wasn't in love with him. I was just lost. I was confused, and I thought I needed someone to fill the emptiness I was feeling. But I never wanted to hurt you." I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but I pushed it aside. "So what was it? What exactly happened between you two?" Clara took a deep breath, her voice faltering. "It started as a friendship. Max and I worked together, and he was always there, always willing to listen. I felt like you were so wrapped up in everything, your job, your routines, that I started to feel invisible. And when I needed someone to talk to just feel seen, he was there. But then things changed. I don't know how it happened, but it did. And before I knew it, I was crossing a line. I was doing things I never imagined myself doing. And I felt trapped, John. Trapped in my own mistakes." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I wanted to yell, to scream at her for what she had done, for how she had turned to someone else instead of coming to me. But the pain was overwhelming, and I could barely speak. "Did you ever think about me?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Did you ever stop for a second and think about what this would do to us? To our future?" Clara closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I didn't think about anything but myself, John. And I'm sorry. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to talk to you about what I was feeling. I thought if I could just get some space, get some distance, I could figure it out. But I only made everything worse." I sat there, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. I didn't know what I was expecting from her, but this wasn't it. I had hoped for some kind of explanation, some kind of reason that made sense of all the chaos, but all I got was a broken woman trying to explain away her actions. I stared at her for a long time, the silence stretching between us. I wanted to reach out, to hold her and tell her it was going to be okay, but I knew that wasn't possible anymore. The trust had been shattered beyond repair, and I didn't know how to put it back together. I don't know what to do with this, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Clara. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Clara's face twisted with sorrow, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. Please, John, don't say that. I love you. I need you. I made a mistake, and I'm willing to do anything to make it right. But as she spoke, I realized something. The love we had, the future we planned, it was all gone. It wasn't just her mistake that broke us. It was the realization that we weren't who we used to be. We had changed, and we couldn't go back. I can't fix this, Clara, I said softly. I can't fix you, and I can't fix us. And just like that, I made my choice. The woman I had loved, the person I had built my future with, was gone. And no matter how much I wanted to believe in us, in the possibility of fixing things, I knew deep down that it was too late. I stood up, my heart heavy with the weight of it all, and turned to leave. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I didn't look back. I knew that walking away was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the only thing I could do. I had to let go. I had to let her go. And for the first time, I felt a strange sense of freedom. The days that followed were the longest of my life. I felt like I was walking through a fog, each moment dragging on without purpose. Work had become a blur of meetings and emails, but none of it registered in my mind. All I could think about was Clara, about what we had, what we'd lost, and whether anything was ever real. The sound of her voice haunted me. I could still hear the desperation in it when she told me she loved me, that she needed me. But the truth was, she had shattered everything between us. It wasn't just about the affair with Max. That had been the catalyst, yes, but the real issue, the real heartbreak, lay deeper than that. I kept thinking about what Clara had said, the part about feeling invisible, about feeling neglected. And I hated myself for it. I hated myself for not seeing it sooner, for not noticing the cracks in our relationship before they became this gaping hole. I couldn't escape the questions. Had I been too focused on my own life, on my routines, on my job? Had I taken her for granted, assuming she would always be there, just as I had always been there for her? Was I so blind to her needs that she felt she had no other option but to seek comfort elsewhere? I replayed everything in my mind, dissecting every conversation, every moment we'd shared over the years. I thought about the little things, the way she'd smile at me in the morning, the way she'd laugh at my jokes even when they weren't funny, the way she'd hold my hand when we walked down the street. Those moments were now tainted by the betrayal. But as much as I tried to piece everything together, it still didn't make sense. I couldn't understand how she had gone from being the woman I trusted with my life to someone who had sought comfort in another man's arms. And Max, he wasn't even part of the equation I could solve. He was a shadow, a reminder of my failure as a partner, someone I didn't want to think about but couldn't help but wonder about. That Friday, I decided to clear my head. I needed space, something to break me out of this endless loop of self-pity and regret. I took the weekend off from work, something I hadn't done in years. I packed a small bag, grabbed my keys, and decided to leave the city. I didn't have a specific destination in mind, but I knew I had to get away. I drove for hours, the scenery shifting from city lights to open roads, and eventually to vast stretches of nothingness. The isolation felt oddly comforting. I spent the night at a small inn near a lake, away from the noise of the world. I woke up early the next morning and took a walk around the lake, the cold air stinging my face, the water reflecting the dull gray sky above. There, on the shore, I stood and let the silence engulf me. For the first time in days, I felt a sense of peace, even if it was fleeting. But my mind kept returning to Clara. I knew I needed to let go, that it was over between us, but the thought of walking away completely was something I wasn't ready to face. I stayed by the lake for a few days, far from everything and everyone, trying to sort through my emotions. And in those moments, I realized something about myself, about us. I had been so consumed with blaming Clara, with holding on to the hurt, that I hadn't stopped to consider my role in everything that had happened. Sure, What she did was unforgivable, but I had been just as blind to her needs as she had been to mine. I had become so focused on my own world that I hadn't realized she was slipping away, that we were no longer the team we used to be. By the time I returned to the city, I had made a decision. I had to face her. I had to tell her that I couldn't be with her anymore, but I also couldn't keep hating her. The truth was, I still loved her. That was the hardest part. How could I still love someone who had hurt me so deeply? How could I still want to be with her after everything that had happened? But love was never about perfection. It was about accepting each other's flaws, each other's mistakes, and growing together. And in the end, we hadn't done that. We hadn't grown together. When I walked into our apartment, I felt a wave of déjà vu hit me. Everything was the same as it had been, but somehow it felt so foreign, like I was stepping into a life that no longer belonged to me. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the stillness of the place. The couch where we'd watched movies together, the kitchen where we'd made dinner and laughed over silly things. All of it was a memory now. Clara wasn't home, but her things were scattered around. Her scent lingered in the air. I could feel her presence even though she wasn't there. I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up the coffee mug she always used in the mornings. It felt so wrong to hold it, but I couldn't help myself. As I stared out the window, the reality of what I had to do settled in. I had to let her go. I had to stop living in the past, stop holding on to the version of her that I thought I knew. I needed to find myself again, to rebuild from the pieces of who I was before we became us. When Clara finally returned home, she looked at me, her face full of uncertainty. She knew something was coming. "I've been thinking a lot," I said, my voice steady but raw. "About everything. About us." She walked into the room slowly, the tension between us thick in the air. "I know, John. I know I've hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it if you'll just let me." I shook my head, cutting her off. "Clara, I can't. I can't keep pretending that things can go back to how they were. I can't forgive what happened, and I don't think I ever will." Her face faltered, and I saw the fear in her eyes. But there was no turning back now. "I think it's time for both of us to move on," I continued, my voice growing softer. "We've both changed, and I don't think we're the people we were when we first met. I think we've outgrown each other. And that's okay. It's time." She stood there, speechless, as the weight of my words hit her. I could see the realization dawning on her face. She had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, it was harder than she had imagined. "I still love you, John," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know," I said, my heart aching. "But sometimes love isn't enough to hold everything together." And with that, I walked out of the apartment for the last time, closing the door behind me. The sound of it was final, but inside, I felt something shift. I didn't know what the future held for me, but I knew one thing. I was finally free. The days after I walked out of the apartment were a whirlwind of emotions I wasn't ready to process. I was free, yes, but it felt like I was drowning in the aftermath. I'd left behind something that had been a huge part of my life, something I thought would last forever. The apartment, the memories, the life we had built together, they all seemed so distant now, like a dream I was trying desperately to wake up from. Every corner of that place held remnants of us. The picture frames, the worn-out couch, the books we had both read. It all hit me like a tidal wave the moment I closed the door behind me. I spent the next few days holed up in a small apartment I'd rented temporarily. I needed space, not just from Clara, but from everything. The isolation felt strange, but necessary. It was like my mind was trying to protect itself, closing off from the world, giving me the time I needed to think, to breathe. But even in the solitude, the questions kept coming. How did I get here? Was this the right decision? Could I really walk away from someone I had loved so deeply? I started to focus on little things to keep my mind occupied. I went out for runs in the early morning, the fresh air helping clear the clutter from my mind. I worked on a few personal projects that had been sitting on the back burner for months. I even picked up a book I had started reading before everything fell apart. It was small steps, but they were steps nonetheless. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that there was one thing I hadn't done yet, one conversation that needed to happen. I hadn't heard from Clara since I left the apartment. I had gotten a few texts from her, some apologizing, some simply asking how I was, but nothing that truly felt like a conversation. I knew I had to meet her again, not for her, not for us, but for closure. We couldn't keep avoiding it. I couldn't keep avoiding it. I had to look her in the eye and tell her once and for all that I was done. No more second chances, no more hoping for things to go back to how they were. It was over. I called her the following afternoon, knowing it would be hard but necessary. She answered almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for me to reach out. "John," she said, her voice shaky, almost as if she were afraid to say anything that might make things worse. "I didn't think you'd call. I need to see you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I knew what I had to do. This was the final moment. There could be no more dancing around the truth. "Where?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Meet me at the same place," I replied. The park. It was a place that had meant something to both of us once. A place where we used to walk hand in hand, talk about our future, laugh without a care in the world. But now, it felt like a place where everything had gone wrong. A place where we could face the reality of what we'd become. When I arrived at the park, Clara was already sitting on one of the benches. She looked small, fragile, almost like a shadow of the woman I had once known. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with the remnants of tears. I could tell she had been crying, and the guilt that washed over me in that moment almost made me want to turn back. But I couldn't. I had already made the decision, and there was no turning back now. I walked over to her and sat down beside her, keeping some space between us. The silence hung heavy in the air, neither of us knowing what to say. It was as if we were both waiting for the other to speak first. I stared at the ground, not wanting to look at her, not wanting to see the pain I knew was written all over her face. Finally, she broke the silence. "John, I'm so sorry for everything. I know I can't take it back, but I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you." Her voice cracked on the last words, and I could see the sincerity in her eyes. She was desperate, broken, but I didn't know if I could believe her anymore. How could I? After everything that had happened, after all the lies, the betrayal, the distance that had grown between us, could I really believe that she had never meant to hurt me? "I don't know what you want me to say, Clara," I said, my voice low but firm. "You hurt me. You broke me. You betrayed me, and I don't know how to forgive that. I don't know if I ever will." She looked away, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I know," she whispered. "I know I can't fix what I did, but I need you to understand. It wasn't about Max. It wasn't even about us, really. It was about me, about the mess I had made in my own life. And I thought if I could just escape, if I could just feel something other than this emptiness, maybe I would feel whole again. I wanted to feel sorry for her. I wanted to say that I understood, that I could forgive her, that we could work through it. But I couldn't. I couldn't let myself go back down that road. Not after everything. Not after what I had seen. "You don't get it," I said quietly, but with force. "You didn't just break my trust. You broke something inside me. And I don't think I can ever put that back together. Not with you. Not with anyone." Her eyes welled up with tears again, and she reached out toward me, her hand trembling as it hovered near mine. But I pulled back slightly, not wanting to give in, not wanting to let her get too close again. "I don't want your pity," I said, my voice hardening. "I don't want your apologies. I don't even want your love anymore. It's over, Clara." Her face fell, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had loved in her expression, the vulnerability, the fear, the heartbreak. But even that couldn't change what had happened. Even that couldn't erase the feeling of betrayal that I could never forget. "I'll never forgive myself for what I did," she whispered. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I'll always love you, John. Always." "I know you will," I said softly. "But it doesn't matter. Love doesn't fix things. It doesn't undo what's been broken." We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of my words sinking in. I had said everything I needed to say, and now it was time to walk away. There was no more hope, no more pretending that we could go back to the way things were. I couldn't keep living in the past, couldn't keep holding on to a relationship that had already ended. "I'm sorry," Clara said one last time, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry, John." But I didn't respond. I stood up slowly, took one last look at her, and walked away. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I was finally free. Free from the pain. Free from the lies. Free from the woman I thought I would spend forever with. And as I left her behind, I didn't look back. The past was gone. What mattered now was moving forward. I didn't look back as I walked away from Clara, but something in me shifted as I moved further from that park bench, further from the past. The weight that had been hanging over me for weeks, for months, slowly began to lift with each step I took. I had walked away from the life we built together, the life that had once seemed perfect, and yet, for the first time in so long, I felt a strange kind of peace. It wasn't that I didn't still care about her, or that I didn't still love her in some way. It was that I had come to terms with the fact that love alone wasn't enough to hold us together. We had both changed, and sometimes, no matter how hard you fight to keep something alive, it's just not meant to be. As I walked through the city streets, I felt a flicker of hope inside me that I hadn't felt in a long time. The world seemed bigger somehow, like there was a future waiting for me that was full of possibilities. And that future didn't have to involve Clara. It didn't have to involve anything from the past. It was my chance to start again, to rediscover who I was before I became us, before I became defined by a relationship that, in the end, wasn't what I needed. Over the next few weeks, I focused on rebuilding myself. I reconnected with old friends, the ones I had drifted away from when I was so wrapped up in my life with Clara. I started picking up the things I loved again, the hobbies I'd abandoned, the small joys that had once made me happy. I spent weekends hiking in the mountains, something I had always enjoyed but hadn't done in years. I went to art galleries and coffee shops, soaking in the world around me, finding beauty in places I'd once ignored. The more time I spent focusing on myself, the more I realized that I was okay. I was stronger than I had given myself credit for. I was learning to be content on my own, to appreciate the solitude instead of seeing it as something to escape from. One evening, a few months after everything had happened, I sat on the same bench in the park where Clara and I had last spoken. The trees had begun to change, the leaves turning gold and amber, and I could hear the rustling of the wind through the branches. It was a peaceful moment, one of reflection. I had been through the darkest part of the storm, and now, I was finally able to see the light. As I sat there, I realized something important. The pain I had gone through, the heartache, the loss, was part of me, but it didn't define me. I wasn't just the guy who had been betrayed. I wasn't just the guy who had walked away from love. I was more than that. I was someone who had the strength to let go, to move on, and to find my own path again. And that path was still unfolding, still waiting for me to walk it. It was then that I heard a familiar voice behind me. "John." I turned around, a little surprised, but when I saw her, I felt nothing but calm. Clara was standing there, her expression softer than I had ever seen it. She wasn't the same woman I had left behind months ago. She was different now, not in the way I had imagined, but in the way that life changes us all. "I just wanted to say, thank you," she said quietly, her voice holding a mix of sadness and gratitude. "Thank you for being who you were, for being the person I thought I could have a future with. I know I hurt you, but I think I've finally come to terms with it, with everything. And I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, truly, but also that I wish you nothing but happiness." Her words were simple, but they meant everything. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't trying to win me back. She was just acknowledging the past, acknowledging her mistakes, and offering a final piece of closure for both of us. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Thank you, Clara. I appreciate that. I really do." For a moment, we just stood there in silence, two people who had shared something beautiful, something painful, but who had both moved on. Clara looked at me one last time, her face soft and open. "I hope you find everything you're looking for, John. You deserve it." With that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the fall afternoon, leaving me standing there with a sense of peace that I hadn't expected. As I watched her go, I realized that I was no longer angry, no longer hurt. I was free. I had let go of the past, and now I could move forward without the weight of what was. I took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill my lungs, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a while, I knew I was ready to face it. And maybe, just maybe, the best was yet to come. As I stood up from the bench and walked away, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm light over the path ahead. It was a new beginning, a new chapter, and this time, I would write it all myself.